Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media, AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in, and you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now about what Josh Harris said about the Commander's name. Anyway, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I'm joined by Sam Fortier from the Washington Post and of TikTok fame, Sammy TikTok. He goes by that. Shout out Mrs. Fortier, getting that out of the way early because I almost forgot last time. Anyways, so today I'm joined by Sam. And Sam, we just got out of a press conference with Josh Harris. We're going to get to a lot of stuff. I don't want to just focus on this, but it's the first thing that he was asked and talked about. And it's obviously been a big topic here about the team name. The Commander's name is not going anywhere. And for people watching, this is not our decision. We are relaying information that we hear. Anyways, any surprise by that?
No, because I think that Josh Harris says the quiet part out loud when he talks about wanting things that unify the fan
Right.
base. It's not just good for, him and being a former fan or being a fan still, growing up around, when this team was at the height of its powers, but also it's good for business for them to unify around. And I know, the team name, the team success in general. And I just think that like the team name, while they've left the door ajar more in the past, they really, I thought, slammed it shut today. This to me is about, hey, we don't want anything distracting from the fact that we have Jaden Daniels. We have a team that could potentially go to the Super Bowl. We are now in contention for, big name free agents and a new stadium. Like there's a lot of optimism and unity going on right now. And while I understand that a lot of people don't like the name, and we can talk about, the Washington Post did a poll that's showed how much people didn't like the name, which is quite stark. But basically, like, I think Josh Harris and the ownership group is like, okay, people are uniting. Let's just put the foot on the gas and keep going.
And I think I would be curious to see what that poll would say now. I don't know if it would change or not, but I think where the embracing part is what he sees, the embracing of the team and the franchise, whatever the name is. Like what we saw this fall and this during the winter was the community fully wrapping their arms around this group again for the first time in a long time. And so I think that's, as he said, with politics and this city can divide, like this is the unifier, this team. And we saw that. And I think that's what he's referring to. It has nothing to do with the name. It's about the success in the field, the way they played. And also it's an organization that you no longer have to be embarrassed by.
In April, more than 50% of local sports fans said, hey, we hate or dislike this name. More than 50% of Commanders fans said, hey, we hate or dislike this name. 16% of the fans were like, just change it again, like do something else. And so, like you said, since that, in the last 12 months, we've really seen a lot of rejuvenation. 12-5 season, first NFC Championship game since the 91 season. Like, there's just so much good going on.
Daniels.
Some guy named Jaden Daniels. Like, I think that like they are going to do everything they can to stay on the up and up because this franchise, like he bought it because he's a fan and it didn't necessarily make financial sense. But there is a financial incentive for him to get this thing right. A new stadium, I think, would be absolutely massive. They talked about still wanting to stay on track with 2030 there. So this is just down the list of priorities. And I know that fans don't like it, or a lot of fans don't like it. But if they win a Super Bowl next year, I think they'd be okay.
And I think there's also a sense, too, that I've gathered, because I've never in the last, when it became a topic again last week, I did not hear anything that pointed in the direction of, hey, they're thinking about it. The really what I got more of was, focus on other things, other priorities. And I do think like this season changed things, I think, for them internally. And just, you heard Adam Peters and Dan Quinn talking about a commander standard. And they started referencing that like this is who they are now. And like you go to another name, and I think for some it becomes a little bit like, at what point do you just stick on a name? Because whatever they change it to, I know some people think it's easy to change something else. Is that going to unify then? Or is it going to be like, Jesus, this is embarrassing at a certain point? Like pick a name and go with it and just build a good franchise.
I want to acknowledge too that fans who hate the name or associate it with the dark days of Dan Snyder, I totally understand that. I think it's a completely legitimate feeling.
1,000% agree.
But I also think the way that this ownership group is handling the name is indicative of why they are better stewards for this franchise than Dan Snyder.
Yeah.
Josh Harris and his group is never trying to win the offseason. They are not doing the splashy thing because it is going to get people excited in headlines in April. they are doing the things that they believe will build this into the best football team and therefore business that they can for their interests. And so to me, like this situation, while dissatisfying, is better for fans than chasing the quick sugar high of, oh, I did a thing that some people would like, so I can win the day in April.
And that's what used to take place here quite a bit. And I agree with that. Like, this isn't about whether I or you like the name, dislike the name, or anything. It's just analyzing what they did and why, and what you hear behind the scenes and why they feel this way. Because, like, listen, I'm a traditional football guy, like, so there you go. But it's not our call. And I understand the frustration. I grew up in Cleveland, Indians fan, Guardians fans now. I still root for them. So it doesn't change things. And I also think, but I think here, since they came in charge, the priority has been first building on the field, getting that right, and they've accomplished that this year. How they go from here, but they've set a great foundation. You got the quarterback to lead it, you got the right people in charge, and then it's the stadium. Get that right, because if you don't get those things right, they're building more of an infrastructure around here rather than they're trying to basically serve you a meal rather than a Snickers bar and satisfy that craving for a minute, right?
Yeah, I love that analogy. Like you can tell
Sometimes
Keim in the off season has been cooking up.
I
He's
got a
been
little
on his
rest.
bike.
I got a
He's been
little
doing
rest.
this
I
whole
did some
thing.
exercise too. I did push-ups this morning.
Did you really?
Look at that.
Well, for people that are watching, they just saw the a little flex. I love it.
Yes, there you go. It was, I'm back.
A
I'm back
little
working on
flex.
that. A
I'll
little
give
flex,
you
a little
that.
flex. But I do think you're right. And I think the one thing that, and again, I point out to people, this isn't to denigrate or to make someone upset who liked the old name. I get it. I know the attachment to it. I know how it means to, like, you and your parents rooted for this team name. I get it. But I also and I would tell people, like, it was never just about the name. You have to improve the on-field product. You have to build an organization that you want to be proud of rooting for. In 2018, they're going to play the Houston Texans at home. They're 6-3. This should be an exciting time for them. People weren't going to games. Like, it's certainly not selling out. I was at the mall with Josh Norman watching him hand out free tickets at the mall to get people to go to the game. Like that, and it was the Redskins. So it's always been about, can you build a better organization? I get the attachment. I'm not diminishing that, but it was always about, to me, it's about, like, you have to build the organization to then get people to embrace you.
There's a certain a certain subset of fans for whom the name will always mean the most.
I agree.
And I totally understand that. But I think
Me
that,
too.
I've been in the parking lot for the last 5 years talking to people who are there. And in 2022, I think when it reached really its lowest point before the sale announcement and the end of 2021, I just would walk around to tailgates and people would say, all these empty parking spots around me used to be my friends. And so, or I went from 10 season tickets to 4, and then from 4 to 2, and then, my buddy gave them up. And so I've written a couple stories about this. You talk to sociologists who talk to sports fans, and it's like, hey, for teams that have been horrible for years, a woman whose name I wish I could remember, she works at a college in Ohio, which, shout out to Ohio for John Keim. She told me that, like, basically she was a fan of the Jets and she moved to Columbia, South Carolina to take a job. And basically, like, even though the Jets were terrible the entire time when she was there was a community of fans that met at the bar to watch the game. And, like, even though they lost, even though they sucked, like, they still went there to watch the game. And I think that, like, the most important thing to Josh and to the owners is uniting these people. And so, like, yes, people might not agree about the name, but if you see 5, 10, 15 more of your friends at the game next year, if they're in the parking lot with you beforehand, like, I think that emotional bond that people have is going to trump the name in terms of effect on this fan base. And like I said, there will always be a certain subset of people who will be upset about that. But I think they're betting that group of people who are going to unify because of it is larger.
And I think you get more people coming on board because of it. But I do agree, like, I know what the name means and how it gets handed down. Like, this is who you rooted for with your grandfather. You're sitting on his lap watching in the 70s or 80s. I get it. I've been there. But I also, I think for this group, it goes beyond that. And I think it's that unifying factor. So here we are. Anyways, I had one other point, but I forgot what I was going to say. And it's probably really salient and smart, but I'm just going to let it.
That doesn't sound like you.
No, it doesn't. Well, the forgetful part does, but but I'm going to let it sit there in my head. And if I think of it, I'll come back to it because I do want to get to other stuff because I don't think anybody wants to just harp on this for right now because there's so many other things. But I did want to at least discuss it.
I am actually kind of curious, and I would be curious if people would let us know either on Twitter
Yeah.
or Instagram or whatever, like what percentage of listeners do you think like the name is a top issue? Because like we're discussing this because people really care about it. We've heard that on feedback, on social media and in emails and things like that. But I would be really curious, like what people
I would be
think.
too. And listen, drop us a line here. And I'm not going to say that your opinion is right or wrong by any means because it's your opinion and it's your thought. And, I'll be generous and say, you can think what you want, like how nice of me. But I do understand the stench of the past ownership and wanting to get away from that. I get that completely. I just wonder if this team wins now with Jaden Daniels as a Commander's quarterback for several years, does that help you get past that? And there's no way to know until we reach that point.
Right.
So I don't know if it will or not. This year was the first time I saw, you seeing people in classrooms wearing all Commanders gear and as they get ready for the playoffs and just how the community rallied or just, again, threw their arms around him for the first time in decades. It was that universal. So that comes from winning, regardless of what the team is called. And I would also wonder, like, what name is ever going to unify anybody here? Therefore, pick one, go and build a good team organization.
Yeah.
So,
I'm curious, like we've spent 15 minutes, something like that, talking about this. So just drop us a line, let us know if you thought this is exactly what I wanted to hear. There's more, there's less.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Because we want to talk about football too. You know, like I want to know, like, hey, which edge rusher are you looking at? Which receiver? But we do also want to address things that like people care about.
It was a topic, and when this started coming out last week, it was, to be honest, it's exhausting. I understand it, but it's like I'd rather just the whole year was great because it was all football. And so I'm with you. You want to talk about that and not like, is this going to happen? Is it not? And they spend a few days poking around, seeing, is this actually a possibility? And you come to the conclusion like, no, it really isn't. So, but I thought it was more closed today for the future, more so than just the present as well. So that's where we're at. Anyways, let's get to football because that's the whole thing, right? The other part of this is how aggressive, like you listen to Josh, how aggressive now do you think they're going to be going into the offseason based on this year?
I think that they're going to be more aggressive. Josh is too smart to, pen in Adam Peters by saying, oh, we need to spend X number of dollars and we need to be aggressive on the trade market. I think a good indicator that honestly, like just broke before we got on here, but Myles Garrett requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. I think that like the Commanders should definitely look into that.
Sure.
Are they going to, I guess like my first question, I haven't seen any reporting out of Cleveland or in the national media, but it's like, his contract is significantly lower than the top guys at his position. He's out of guaranteed money. How much of this is a leverage play for a new contract versus, hey, I'm legitimately trying to get out of Cleveland? I think if he is legitimately available, then you got to call and you've got to figure out, like, is this something that's realistic? Do we have the salary cap space? Do we have, they do. Do we have the draft picks? Are we willing to be as aggressive as we are, considering that we used kind of a lot of our we used some of our bullets on Marshawn Lattimore to trade for at the deadline. But to me, like Myles Garrett, I think is a good bellwether of how aggressive, if they did pull the trigger, I think that would be a real good indicator of like, we're going all in. We have the cap space. He's an elite player at a position of need. We're going to go all in. I don't have, I think, a more nuanced analysis because we haven't been able to dig into this a ton. Correct. But I think that's my surface level take on what you just talked about.
And I think going back to Myles or sticking with Myles, like the Browns have said they're not going to trade him. So it'll be curious to see, but what if you get blown away? Can this team blow them away with what they have? And this is the beauty of the season is that you're picking 29th. But the hard part in this situation is you're picking 29th. Like, is that really going to entice Cleveland and say, oh, okay, because you obviously have to throw in a couple first round picks. So if you're Cleveland, I'm looking at this franchise and saying, like, there's a good chance they're picking around that same spot next year. So you're really looking at two low ones, and then you'd have to throw something else in there clearly to entice them. And is there a player here that you're willing to give up? And please don't say like a John Allen or anything like that. Like, you've got to make it enticing for Cleveland to do it, not to get rid of a guy that maybe you don't want to keep. I'm talking about the fans, not the team. But you know what I'm saying? Like, right. So does that exist? But with 1,000%, you have to make that call. And I think they would. I can't imagine that they wouldn't, but you have to at least explore it because, Luka Doncic, right?
Yeah, I mean, for real though, like that
You never
I
know.
think reorients and reshapes your expectations for deal making.
Yeah.
Because if he's available, then anyone is. And I
Yeah.
think obviously, the executives and the ownership vary from team to team, but the Browns have said, "Hey, we're not going to take these calls. You got to try." If I'm Cleveland and I get an offer of two ones and a 2025 third or maybe even a second, like I don't know if I can do that deal because you are not in position in the low 20s, and even in the 20s
You're
at
talking
all.
about from this team.
Yeah, yeah, to land a difference
Right.
making player. I think that it's going to be difficult. And I think other suitors probably have stronger offers.
Right. And I think because to me, I'd look at a team, if I'm the Browns, I'm looking at a team that maybe is coming off it might be a player away, like San Francisco, right? Who had a bad year because of injuries and maybe looking to swing. I think they have their first round pick, don't they? You
I,
know
I'm
what?
I'm not sure.
So if the Niners have first round pick, then go ahead and give them a call. But I think that to me, that's the kind of team that you might be able to strike a deal with. Team that like you want to win now, maybe you had a bad year because of X, Y, or Z, then you think you're better than that. And then you can make that deal. But I think this team, again, might not be in that position because of where they're picking, but you actually have to make the call. The other guy,
San Francisco does have its first round pick. They are picking 11th.
okay,
So
so there,
that's
that's closer. So
yeah.
and then if you're the Niners, you still have to give up one or two other things because just the 11th isn't going to do it, not in this draft. But I think that's a good starting point for them. So that's where, make the call. You may not be able to do it unless you get really creative. Can you do that? I don't know. And again, if I'm Cleveland, I'm thinking this team's going to be picking in the 20s next year, for sure. So the other guy that is going to be talked about a lot is T. Higgins this offseason. I know, like, what do you spend at receiver to bring in a guy like that? Or do you go, let me ask you this, where would you say be more aggressive at this spot? Is there a spot that you'd say to, or is it more of a player that you'd say to spend? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's contextual, obviously, depends on, which players are available at which spots. But for me, T. Higgins is not a top priority. If you get what you feel like is a good value for a really, really good receiver, I think you absolutely do that. But I'm not resetting the market. I'm not making a huge splash for a wide receiver too, because personally, I think you have to start with the trenches. I think the offensive and defensive lines, if you look especially at their last 6 weeks of the season, they got bullied in the games. Like
Yeah.
even the games that they won,
Yeah.
they won despite
The Saints game was
the
eye-opening
lines.
to me.
Yes, they got bullied in that game.
Yeah.
And so to me, like you got to start by protecting Jaden Daniels. You got to start by knocking other quarterbacks down. And I just have a lot of faith in Jaden and Cliff Kingsbury, whoever the skill core guys are. Hey, we're gonna figure it out. You have Terry, who's a legitimate number one, and like whoever else is there, I think that they're gonna figure it out. And at receiver, particularly, especially with how much college offense is thrown now, like every receiver class is deep in the draft. There's very few Jamar Chases, but there's a lot of guys who can be.
And you're not getting Jamar at 29, not off the top
Right.
of it, not
Yes,
going
exactly.
into it.
But to me, like, figuring out like who's in the second or third tier in the draft, if you want to use a first round pick on that guy, like I think that's totally acceptable instead of T. Higgins. I just think you have a lot of assets. Figuring out asset allocation is obviously Adam Peters' biggest job. And if I'm him, I'm focusing at other places before receiver.
I would agree with that. And like I like T. Higgins a lot. I mean, it's hard not to.
Of course.
But how much do you really want to spend there? And then I think the other thing is again, which position, if you want to make the impact, I was talking about this on my podcast the other day, but defense is what cost them in that Philly game more than anything. Like the inability to take the ball away in that game, but also to stop them. And you need to try and figure out how do you stop that offense. And then along with that, talk about protecting Jaden. It's also they couldn't run block to the level they needed to. And so as much Jaden does a good job of protecting himself. So, remember, even early in the year when the line looked like doing well, you talk to some of the linemen like, hey, this kid's making me look good because I got beat here and here, but he gets out of it. But the run game, you get beat here and here, and now you're getting 2 yards a carry. So like they've got to get better in that area to compete with that. So where would which positions, if you said, I'm going to prioritize money, just generally, how would you rank it?
Edge rusher.
There we go.
That's my number one.
All right, right here.
or interior,
Yeah,
if you can
either
get
way,
run
yeah,
stopper, like
correct.
because I do think the run, in particular in the middle, really struggled this year. But like edge rusher to me, and like if you want to isolate like one play, the first play on offense of the Philly game, they can't set the edge. Saquon gets outside, he hits a home run. Like that, not just pressure on quarterbacks, but setting the edge in the run game,
It's huge.
it's huge. And so, like Myles Garrett obviously would take care of a lot of problems if you were to acquire him. But in general, I think you have to upgrade that area, and it's an area other than Dorrance Armstrong. They had a lot of guys on 1 year deals. They're going to figure it out. I think that they knew. It's from the beginning. Adam Peters built a bridge roster. He was going
Correct.
to, use this to establish it and figure out, okay, what do I have? What do I need? And I think it was a really smart approach. But edge rusher, I think, is a position that he has to focus on getting right this offseason.
I think I'm with you on that because for the same reason you said, there was an inconsistency with setting the edge and how important that is in stopping the run. I think if you had to say what's the number one thing to stopping the run, with what I saw this year, you got to set the edge more consistently. And then I think even like if you have Bobby Wagner at linebacker again, I think he did a really good job in these areas. But if you're concerned about his ability to get lateral as much anymore, then you better have interior and then setting the edge to allow him to really maximize what he can do as well. Because I'll take what he can do still. I like what he does, and what he does he does it still very well. But you still need to, if you want to help the run defense, edge, and then consistent interior.
Yeah, and I think that for the interior, you want to get players and improve, but I think that like, what is your plan for helping Johnny Newton and Daron Payne improve in the run game? Because I think that, we can talk about whether John Allen will be
I
back
was going to say
here.
you left out a name, so I was curious. Like,
Well,
yes,
I think that he is,
we
but
don't know.
yeah, we don't
We
know.
don't know.
Like, I'm not saying they're going to cut him, but I think that,
We
he's
don't
out of
know.
guaranteed money. It's very possible that they move on from
He's
him.
got a high cap number for that spot, and where I think it'd be hard to pay him at that cap hit.
Right. But is he willing to restructure to hang around? Like
a lot of questions.
A lot of questions. So we can throw John Allen in there as well. But I think that like if he's around or whether he's not around, Daron Payne and Johnny Newton are going to be huge parts of your interior defense. And so like how do you get them better in the run game? Because I think that like both of those guys were a part of the problem in terms of stopping the run. And that they're going to be out there most likely. So what's the plan?
And the funny thing is, like, if you brought someone in here who's a good run stopper, could you then take John Allen and make him more of a 3 technique pass rush guy, let him go, right? Like, you know what I mean? And
he might really like that.
Exactly, which allows him to age better at this spot rather than having to take on double teams on rundowns and having to do all that dirty work stuff. Like maybe that's a way to maximize him, but I think the only way you do that is by extending him and spreading out that hit a little bit differently. But that could also, again, to have him if you had him in that role, how would that look? But so then it depends on who you're getting in there. But I do think you're right. Like you've got to be better in that area, because if you're not, I think it's going to be hard for this defense to improve. And plus, like you look at this, you're going to face Barkley a couple times a year. I mean, for sure. And so, I think you have to be able to stop that if you want to beat that team.
Right. And like Philly, I think, has really set a good model for this. They're losing Jason Kelce, a Hall of Fame center. Boom, you bring in Cam. Like you let him scout his replacement and bring in Cam Jurgens. And so to me, it's like, whatever way you can get on that model, like you got to do it. And so, hey, Bobby Wagner, what's your input on linebackers you should bring in, things like that? I know they love Jordan McGee, and maybe he takes a step next year. Although, if they bring Bobby back and then you're looking at Frankie Louvu, how does he fit in? Blah, blah. We can get down the rabbit hole there.
A lot of time in the offseason.
Right.
It's funny because like a couple people got, and I don't blame him. I mean, Nikki and I last we were talking about Jaden Nance, like, enough. We know he's poised. Like, I get it, but there's 5 more months. It's, there's a long time to discuss all this.
That's why I
hear you.
I'm
I
not
hear
bringing
you.
up any, like it's been a week.
Jaden Daniels poised.
And I've looked at.
I hear you.
I usually I've gone to the Senior Bowl the last like 4 years, and I didn't go this year because we were taking care of stuff in Ashburn, which is weird. Not the norm, but like, you start looking around, you start seeing, okay, this guy pops on film, but it's like, I'm not saying any names yet because like we got a long way to go.
A long way to go. And it is funny because I told my wife, like, in the past, I'm like 3 weeks deep into the off season. It was so weird to like wait a minute, February's here.
Right.
And we just finished covering a season. Like, how do you react? So I'm like, oh, good. That's like 1 month less of speculation that we have to talk about. And the speculation this offseason will be all good. So, 'cause so much of it's going to be on allocating money and just, you know, the 29th pick is not a sexy pick, but there's a lot of mystery there where you could go. Do you know what I mean? And so much of it depends on free agency. But I think with this group, it's going to be like, hey, whoever the best guy is there, which would be the pick, right? I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. That's how you should always operate. But
Well, and I think like one of the interesting things, and maybe I'm getting too far ahead of myself, but the Commanders, right, they have amassed draft capital in the past by shedding
right,
guys, Montez, Chase, et cetera, et cetera. They are not going to be in that position anymore,
right,
which I think is a fascinating part of what Philly has done, what other, competitive teams have done. You want to stockpile picks. And in San Francisco, they had a lot of minority candidates get hired as head
right.
coaches, get hired as GMs, and so like that helped them keep their draft pick calculus going. And so like it's not to make it transactional in that way, but like Adam Peters is going to have to figure out, okay, I have my 7 draft picks now. How do I continue getting more bites at
Right.
the apple? How do I maximize
Right.
this without trading players? And so the 29th pick, when you look at like what the contract is, the fact that you get a 5th-year option, if a team is like more desperate to come up than you are to get a certain player at that spot, do you trade down and try to get more picks?
That's a great, again, that's another topic for a full episode
yeah, sorry,
down the
sorry,
road.
sorry.
But we'll touch upon it here because I do think that's a good observation or good thought that the goal will be, because knowing how he wants to build, they're going to probably, I'm just guessing here, that they'd want to add 1 or 2 more picks to this class. However you can do it, maybe it's swapping those or maybe it's swapping something later. I don't know if there's a player they could package with a pick to move up. I mean, that the one who would obviously be John Allen, but I don't know that they would do that. I don't know if another team would do it. I don't know. But I think he will look for ways to maybe get a few more selections because they are so big on that.
And I think that's probably the main counter argument against acquiring Myles Garrett. And like I think that they would do it for an impact player, a Hall of
Yeah.
Fame level player, obviously. But if you're Adam Peters and it's important to you to build through the draft, and you're having to give up 3 picks, 2 of which are first rounders, like you got to be sure, and you got to be very confident that like we have strategies where we can get picks on the back end. Like this is a much larger framework than just like put it in the trade simulator and hit go.
Right. And I think, again, if you can get him for 29th and then a future 24th, 30th, whatever it is. I mean, if you get, listen, I would say this, again,
You didn't say 30
no,
coward.
I would no, I was just listen, I was just going to amend that because like, wait a minute, if you get Myles Garrett, that kind of makes you a lot better. So yes, that pick could be 30, 31, 32 for sure. So, because if you're Cleveland, you have to think like that because like, hey, we're giving them arguably the best defensive player in the NFL. And they clearly have one of the best offensive players in the NFL already, a quarterback that's going to make them a lot better. So that's where, again, I think that's where it's going to make it hard for them to really get into that conversation to the level that it would take to get him. But I think we kind of rounded back to that. Let's talk more about the name. No.
That's because I was being the host and I was getting this foul. I was bringing it back. Yeah.
It's your basketball point guard day. So, go take a charge.
Uh,
Anyways, you got anything else?
no, it's good to be back in Ashburn. It's weird, man. We were here for pretty much like from late July through, late January. It was like 6 straight months of coming out here. And it's honestly, it's just weird to have been out here. I know we keep saying that. And like hopefully people aren't like bored and turning off the podcast because like we keep saying, oh, it's so weird, but like
It is.
It's bizarre that like we were out here for 6 straight months.
I will say this, next year, please get home field advantage because that last month was just brutal. It was Dallas, Tampa, Detroit, Philly. And it's
Well,
good Marriott points.
the Dallas trip was tough because you and I were
know,
stuck there for 3 extra days or whatever it was.
But it was still like 4 consecutive weeks on the road. So favor to ask next year is to get home field advantage.
Yeah, I mean, come on, they gotta overtake Philly in the
How hard
division.
is it to go 16-1? You just won 12 in the regular season, win a few more, and then there you go.
That is one of the interesting things I thought that one to add one more thing on this, like Josh Harris didn't shy away from that
Right.
today. He said, like, look, we've arrived. The expectations are higher now. And it's like you hear the owner of the team say that, And if you're Adam Peterson in your office, you're like, yep, like time to cook, man.
And I think that's a great thing to embrace that.
Yeah.
Like I go back to, Ron's second year where he's like, maybe we made the mistake of doing this in our first year. It's like, no, 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 no. It's you have to embrace where you're at. I think one thing I learned with Quinn, especially because we dealt with him every week, but clearly Josh Harris, like embrace where you're at. If you lost a game, embrace the lesson you can learn to make yourself better. If you win a game, embrace like the fact that you can still play better, right? But it's doing that. And I think with the expectations, like, yes, there are these expectations. That's a good thing. Now you have to live up to this standard that they've set. And I think there will be more pressure, but that's a good thing because because the alternative is there aren't any expectations. Why is that? Because you're not very good. They are.
Right. And I think that the thing that should probably make fans feel the most optimistic is these guys adapt to every situation that they're in. And it's like, I really like playing poker. And when I'm at the poker table, it's like sometimes, you see a hand that you're not going to play, but the way it plays out, you're like,
Right.
oh, like it's actually, there's a lot of value for me to be in this hand just to see the flop. And so it's like with Adam Peters, he probably didn't plan on trading away a bunch of draft picks at the
Right.
deadline his first year to get a corner. But it was like, hey, like we have a window here and we have a clear weakness and we got to run through it. And so I think that's the thing. Like they are going to pay attention and adjust and not just get stuck on like, oh, well, this is what we said we were going to do, so we're going to
Right.
do it.
It takes 3 years. No, it's like, and also you see how good Jane Daniels is. You've got that window, several year window. Be aggressive trying to get through that and win now because it's really hard. And once you pay a quarterback, you can do it, but you have to be smarter and he just has to hit more often. But now you've got a great chance because of his rookie contract. And I think for sure they're going to try and take advantage of that window. And Josh Harris, said like that, this is a good opportunity for them because of that. And I think that's something they're, who they get in free agency, we don't know yet. There's a lot of time to talk about that. Although again, less time to talk about it than there are in normal seasons. But this year, but that's good. So I think there's going to be a lot to look forward to. So anything you want to plug, Sam?
You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok, SAM the number 4TR WP, and you can read my work in the Washington Post.
Sammy TikTok. There we go. Sam, I always appreciate him joining me. You can see why he's very smart, very good at what he does. So thanks, Sam, for joining me. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Thursday with another episode. So I'll talk to you next time.